I don't know if you guys knew this, but I just found out today that actually since the 1970s, there's always been some family member of a Cheney in the upper echelon of Republican leadership. And that changed today as Liz Cheney was finally voted out of her third position in the House following her just criticism of Trump and kind of her statements about reality and how the election wasn't stolen, all that jazz. But it sounds like the Republican Party has completely gone off the rails now. And I'm sad, angry, but not really surprised. So today on the Tonic Accord, we're just going to talk about maybe like how this happened and what's next. So, Drew, hope all is well. I'm back from a little small holiday and excited to be back with you talking.
Yeah, man, welcome back. I saw quite you're on doing quite the hikes. I saw, and it looked awesome, man. But yeah, welcome back to politics, and it never sleeps, and it's certainly not sleeping for Cheney anytime soon. So yeah, so like you had mentioned, she had just today been officially voted out of her leadership position, and kind of what that means is she's still a representative. She's not like she didn't lose her seat in government. It's more of it within her party. She is now no longer considered a leadership role. She's probably not going to be appointed to like chief chair positions in the future. She's not going to be really regarded as a voice of the party at all. And so this is what that was. So for people confused on what did they just vote Liz Cheney out of, she's still a government official. She's still a representative, and in fact, from what I hear, she plans to run again for re-election. But she's kind of lost all her sway within her party, and this is certainly a nail in the coffin of that, a symbolic gesture of we don't think you're a leader in our party at all.
Yes, very good point. I'm glad you mentioned that because it's true that yes, she's not just kicked out of Congress or something, but it does obviously kind of show that the Republican Party's new litmus test is the big lie, right? And the big lie meaning the election was stolen and that Trump won and Biden's an illegitimate president. Lots of fun to put into that, and yeah, I mean, it is interesting for me that she is planning on running again. I know in the short term she's really unpopular. Things might change in the meantime, but right now I could not see her winning in Wyoming. I just remember what our friend Matt Gaetz back in the day. I mean, he even went to Wyoming to do a rally literally to criticize, Cheney in her own state, and it's just crazy to me. And I remember during the early crazy days following January 6th, which by the way was only 4 months ago. Marjorie Taylor Greene, was doing all this stuff. Lauren Boebert, all those type of lovely winners, and Kevin McCarthy, basically said that the GOP was a big tent. And at the time, I meant maybe that's like they're saying we have enough room for different opposing views. But to me, at this point, I think it really meant that if people want to be accepted inside of the current GOP, they kind of have to embrace this big tent. They can't speak out against this big tent of crazies. And Liz Cheney never wanted to go along with it. She has a backbone, and you may agree with her views or not, but she does seem to have a red line, which is democracy, I guess.
Yeah, so that's where this whole thing kind of gets weird. Like weird is why this is happening because I think there's two main arguments as to why something like this happened to Liz Cheney, and they're not necessarily both. They're not one's not necessarily wrong. They're just kind of both true. But like, I'll get into what I'm explaining. So the first one I see is that um, I see it as Liz Cheney says, "Hey, I believe Joe Biden was legitimately elected, and I believe that Donald Trump lost the election." I personally don't think that's a controversial statement to make, but she's the one on one hand, a lot of people see it as she's getting punished for this. She's getting punished for believing that Trump legitimately lost an election, which is what happened. That's not up for debate anymore, and I think she even herself says that like we have to we have to be loyal to truth and like uphold what our courts of law say, and the courts of our the court of law has said that the election was valid. um However, the other argument I hear from Republicans like Jim Jordan is that she doesn't represent what Republican voters want. She just legitimately, he even says, I think it's, why would you have a Republican leader that represents only single digit numbers of what Republican voters believe? She's just not in line with where the party's at. And he's not necessarily wrong. I think that's true. But the reality is, she is not where most of Republican voters are at because she accepts the truth that the election is valid. That's the thing. It's like both at once. Like, she is getting punished for her belief that the election was valid, that Joe Biden won. And at the same time, she's misaligned with the majority of Republican Party because the Republican Party doesn't believe the election was valid. So it's in my opinion, it's craziness. It's like, to me, it's like like kicking someone out for thinking the sky is blue. Like, that's now like, well, she's not in line with the majority of Republican voters that think the sky is purple. Like, okay, well, that might be true, but the sky is blue. So yeah, to me, from not a Republican, I see it as insanity.
Well, as a Republican, I also see it as insanity, so we can we can agree on that one for sure. And yeah, I mean, you're right. Just before we started recording, I just saw The Economist put out a graphic today, and yeah, 18% of Republican voters and independents, I guess they've lumped these together in this poll, have a favorable opinion of Liz Cheney. 61% don't. Right. And I agree with you, man. Like, I used to have an optimistic opinion that maybe Liz Cheney and Romney and some of these other ones would be the voice of reason in the party. But you're right. Like, Jim Jordan, unfortunately, is right that Liz Cheney isn't the Republican Party anymore. And to be completely frank, I think it worked out well for the propagandists and the misinformation on Fox News because Liz Cheney is a war hawk, and that's probably the strongest thing that I disagree with her on. Is that she's definitely a war hawk. She believes in strong intervention, and the Republican Party has clearly shifted from that. And so it's an easy talking point for Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson or the Newsmax people to, mention that over and over again, and also talk about how she, voted to impeach Trump. And I think that culmination over the last couple months has led to these voters, like, yeah, there's a somewhat supply of sane Republicans still, but there's no demand for it. And I don't know if that's I don't really know if that's a chicken or the egg with news or just the sentiment of middle America and a lot of like the southern states. But either way, you're right. There isn't a place in Liz Cheney's role anymore. And I'm just gonna just really quick, because I think you're right, is that like she basically got punished for speaking the truth, speaking reality. And that to me is kind of a sobering thing, because I'm going to start out by beginning with the F word, fascism, like right here, because like I'm not trying to call the GOP fascist, but they are moving in a direction that's disturbing in a lot of ways. And, like, just so people know, like, fascism isn't one idea. It can be left or right. Like, some would argue that Stalin was actually more fascist than communist by the end.
Sure. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, right, right. But it's more about just controlling power and maintaining power, usually through force, misinformation, grievance about a bygone era, and kind of this shared patriotism. And I feel like fascism, at least from like the historical context of Mussolini and Stalin and Hitler, it needs flexible people. It needs people that are willing to just go with the wind, like a Lindsey Graham, a Tucker Carlson. And that's what I'm worried, is that the party is becoming that, where, I mean, we'll get to Stefanik later, but she's one of those too, who you don't know what she stands for, but she stands for the big lie and whatever the party wants. And I mean, like Stalin, I remember, like he had, he was originally a communist, but by the end they replaced communists with loyalists. And I think that's what's happening here, is that it's loyalty over ideology. And to be honest, history paints a very bleak picture of what happens when that happens. And Trump, I don't think, is smart, but there are smart people in the party, and they've kind of drank the Kool-Aid, and it's kind of scary to me, to be honest.
I think you make a really good point, and that's what's so ironic about this whole situation is you talk about like irony versus loyalty, or sorry, my bad, loyalty versus ideology, and the ironic thing, that's where I was trying to get to, is that ideologically, she's not that far off of Trump. And if you look at the way she's voted, it's like 90% in line with the Trump administration. Like 90%. That's pretty on the nose, hardline conservative. The things like you had just mentioned, the 10% where she was off of the Trump administration was on foreign policy, on international interventions and stuff, where she's much more war hawkish. So it's like, it's not even like this weird thing where she's ideologically misaligned. It's literally that she called out Trump. It's that she's that on paper says I don't like Trump. And that's what's so funny is you mentioned Stefanik, who's the most likely replacement for Liz Cheney in this leadership role. Is if you look at again like the scorecard of how often they would vote with Trump, Cheney has voted with Trump more than Stefanik has, percentage wise. But Stefanik openly supports Trump and says she supports Trump and openly supports things like this Arizona recount, whatever. So it's like it's lip service. It's who can give lip service to Trump, regardless of ideology. Apparently, because again, it's like this idea that like Cheney's misaligned with where the party's at. Well, in their opinion, yes, like 60% of Republicans don't like her, but ideologically, she's on target. But they don't like her because of she doesn't pay lip service to Trump, and that's what's really scary. Is it literally is a like the party is being consumed by loyalty to a figure that's not even in power anymore.
And that's probably the weirdest thing is that he isn't in power anymore, you know? And like as time has shown to me, it seems like Trump was actually somewhat of a glue for the craziness. Like it seems like the party's accelerated into a direction once he's been out of office because there's almost now this mythos around him. And yeah, any movement or ideology that's centered around a lie and b a mythical figure who's false, I don't think either one of those end well, you know. And you're right, like Liz Cheney, she's hyper conservative,
Very.
and I feel like we need like it's actually I've got a little bit more respect for the Mike Pences and the Liz Cheneys of the world because I full heartedly disagree with a lot of their social issues. But it looks like the Mike Pence, who also agreed with pretty much everything Trump did, especially on the social side, he could have not certified that election. You know, he could have been involved in the lie, and he said no. And I feel like those people are getting less and less. You know, I've heard jokes about like Mike Pence might run against Trump. Hell no. Trump has
No
this
way.
crazy like he has this Trump has this energy, man, where with one well not tweet, I guess blog post now because he's on that blog website he created. Pretty much with one typing moment, he can basically ruin someone's political career. And it kind of worries me because, yeah, there is a red line that Cheney and Pence and a few others saw and they wouldn't cross it. Kind of democracy, constitution. They're true constitutionalists, I guess you could say. But neither one could actually run against him because all his base needs to see is a post or a Fox News article about, I don't know, posturing Pence or something. And next thing we know, he's into obscurity. And that's kind of where we're at now is like you're either a Trump Republican or in nomad land.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm sure I'm not. I know I'm not the only one that's going to have this take, but let's call a spade, man. Like it's pretty weird when you have the party that's so consumed with being anti-cancel culture have a vote to just like cancel one of their top Republicans for just like not agreeing with them. And to really go as far as to literally have a backdoor vote, apparently not even by tally, but by voice is what I've heard, is that they literally
Yep.
just yelled out like, should we get rid of her, yay or nay? And the yays won, and then it was like no one was even recorded with their names down. It was just kind of a really quick meeting. Very strange, man. It does not, um, it does not bode well, um, for I think our democracy when you have a party that has like tripled down now on the idea that our elections are unfair. Um, so like what is the so let's take that at face value. Like now let's say like after this moment marks that then the Republican Party as a party believes that the previous election was unfair and there was election fraud based off of no evidence. In the next election, what happens? Like, okay, so let's say the next election happens and the Democrats win. Will Republicans accept that? Or let's say the next elections Republicans win back the House. Will they ever allow a Democrat to take it back without claiming fraud? Like, when does it end? So yeah, I mean, I think I had mentioned to you off of stream that like it really does feel like this propaganda news machine, and Trump especially, like, poked the bear. Now the bear is awake, and it's just let loose, and Republican elites like Romney and Cheney's, the people that have been in Republican power for decades, can't rein it in. They don't know what to do, and now they're getting ousted by their own bear. And it's like, dude, I mean, I don't know. It's scary. It's scary to think that now, like, half this country legitimately does not believe in our elections. How do we have a functioning democracy like that?
I wish I had an answer for you, man. But like in all seriousness, I don't know where you go from here. It seems like, I mean, yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, like, that's what scares me is what if in 2024 either Harris or Biden wins a re-election and Congress is controlled by Republicans after the midterms or something like that. Um, do they certify the vote? And that's why I go back and forth on whether like Republicans should leave or not, because the ones that have left have just been replaced with crazies. And okay, Mike Pence was willing to certify the election this time. Mitch McConnell was. But these people are going. Like, we know that if Trump runs in 2024, Pence is not going to be the VP. There's no way in hell he's going to be the VP. And the person who's going to replace him is probably not going to be as, I guess, constitutionally smart. And that's crazy for me to say because I am not a Pence guy. He is like everything I don't like in the Republican Party, to be completely honest. But he clearly at least has a conscience on him and understands the rule of law. And so that's where I'm worried. I think you're right, is that, like, if every election now is going to be considered illegitimate, how do you run a country? And like it's different because Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, wrote a great book that I'm reading right now called Fascism: A Warning. And sorry, I beat it over the head, but I'm just curious about fascism and the evolutions. And she basically says that each generation has their own iteration of fascism.
Right.
And to me, Hitler did it very well because he kind of came off as somewhat of a crazy moderate to a lot of Germany. So he was able to get into power. And then once he was in power, he eroded the institutions and took over everything. But to me, it sounds like the media has done Hitler's. Like, imagine if the media we have now was in the time of like a Hitler or a Mussolini or a Stalin or even a Franco or something. Like, it seems like the media needs to be held accountable before anything else does, because like I've watched some of these press conferences with Jen Psaki and Fox News and Newsmax, and the questions they ask are so detached from reality, and these people are watching this and sucking it up, and now you have these like lawsuits in Arizona over bamboo in the ballots. Like they're trying to say these ballots were shipped in from China. Like, it takes so many stretches to believe these things. But if you've been watching for the last 4 years and longer, I think you're too far gone, to be completely honest. Like, you and I can't sit down and have a 3-hour conversation with every person who thinks the election's stolen. And I think that's the only way that it could fix it at this point, is literally asking them, where'd you get this information? How'd you find out about this election? How did you think it was stolen? And we don't have time for that. So, like, that's what scares me, man, is I see both parties having some issues now, because I think the Democratic Party feels like they're the party of reason, and rightfully so. But how do you act when the other party doesn't even think the grass is green when it's green?
Exactly. How do you have a conversation about how to best to grow grass if one person doesn't even think it's in soil, right? Or whatever. Exactly. It's like, how do you have that's why this whole unity thing is BS. Like, how do you unify if half the country is literally like, I will do everything in my power not to unify? Like, okay, well, we're just not going to unify then. And just like Mitch McConnell saying, I'm going to do 100% of my power to stop the Biden administration. Like, all right, well, then I guess we're not going to unify then. All right, like, I guess we're not going to work together. Like, it's strange. It's so weird to see. But I mean, I wanted to mention, though, that like you said, like, you don't think, you made a really interesting point, coming from your perspective, that you don't think Republicans should leave the party because the replacements will be crazier. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say, because just today it came out, more than 100 Republicans, including former governors and lawmakers, are threatening to form a third party if the GOP doesn't split from Trump. Includes governors, members of Congress, and a Bush-era cabinet secretary. What do you make of that? Like, I want to say, like, where if you see, let's say you are like a congressman that was in that vote today, and you didn't want to vote Cheney out. Like, let's say you're like Jeff Flake's out, right? But what's that other guy, Kissinger, or I mean,
Yeah,
there's
Kissinger.
Kissinger, yeah, like let's say you're one of those, and you see your party literally, rejecting truth, and misleading your voters, right? You will want to be a fiscal conservative and a constitutionalist, but you don't feel at home. Like, what do you do? Like, can you understand why maybe some would leave? Like, I'm trying to see from their shoes. I see why they would want to leave, but I also see what you're saying was it might just mean the death of the GOP then.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because I wish I had a perfect answer and I don't because Miles Taylor because I heard a little bit about this and like they've been kind of talking about it since February, but the movement's kind of been led by this Miles Taylor guy who he wrote that book Anonymous. I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration,
Mm,
um, and let's be honest, man, like these people aren't convincing anyone. The
yeah.
the progressive left thinks they're all still neocons and they're still bad. Yeah, the Bidens and I think the U's, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but I think people like yourself and the like a little bit more rational would be willing to work with them. You know what I mean? But the problem is I don't think the majority of each side does. And
Mm,
so it brings me to a point is like realignments do happen in history. We've had a couple in our history in the United States, and to me it does seem like the GOP has become the QOP, the QAnon Republican Party, and I almost do see like I don't see going back from this because I don't know how Adam Kinzinger, whose own family sent him blackmail and threats, I don't see how he's become like gets reelected even. I just don't see an off ramp or even an on ramp. Like what happens when no one listens to you if you start a third party and no one listens to you if you stay in? It seems like the party has just hyper accelerated past them. And to me, it seems like they should stay like they should start a third party because they're not doing anything while they're inside of it. But then again, I think they need to appeal to independence, and that involves sane messaging. And I was happy to see the Bulwark podcast is actually now in the top 10 downloaded on iTunes, which is pretty big because they're kind of a centrist center right movement that just wants to bring sanity. And so I think the crazies like the Republicans are so focused on the primaries right now, and they know that they don't need to be sane to win the primaries that they can do this. But in a general election, I still don't think they have any clout. And I think that's the strength of it is to be completely honest, I think unity under Biden can work, but I think the Romneys need to just say fuck it, excuse my language, and just go out and say we're going to work with Biden because we need to find some middle ground, even if it's not everything we agree in. Okay, we found out we agree on a couple things: democracy, we agree on the Constitution, and we agree on the courts and kind of the rule of law. And I think there are some things we could agree on, but it's going to take the ones that are still in office to speak out. And that's why, to me, Liz Cheney, I would get her tatted on my back right now, just because this is going to be a pivotal moment in history. But like, yeah, to put it full circle, like these 100 former Republicans leave the party and try to bring sensibility. I don't really care if you leave or stay in, but sensibility to independents and moderates, because we have to remember that Trump only has what 30 something, or Trump had when he went in the election, he only had about 30 what 32 33 I think percent of the popular vote. And so they can do it, but these Fox News outlets and Newsmax need to stop propping up that small percentage. And that to me means like, do you fight cancel culture with cancel culture? I just don't know. Like it's just we're in such a conundrum that I don't think there's any part of history that would like I'm kind of a historian myself, and I don't see any historical precedent that sets us for this, and that's why it's going to take some creativity.
yeah, I think that. I mean, I think you're right. I think what we're seeing right now is the strategy is set for 22. All right. The January 6th happened. There was a fork in the road, and the GOP has decided to take a turn to continue on the Trump path, to continue down that rhetoric, continue down that big lie. Really, again, that's what's being called now. And but but we had that moment where maybe McConnell, maybe McCarthy had that moment where they decide, okay, do we double down on this or not after January 6th? Well, now what we're seeing from this vote on Liz Cheney, removing her from her position of power in the party, this is the evidence that, okay, they have really doubled down on the Trump thing. This is now the strategy that they feel is going to win them back seats in 22. I think they probably right. Like, again, like you said, like Liz
Yeah.
Cheney's not popular with her party. People don't like that kind of Republican anymore, even though it's 90% in line with what Trump ideologically wanted. The rhetoric behind, especially the election, is not there, and people wanted that. So we're going to see if the strategy works. I think it will. I think it will short term in 22. But like you said, I agree. I don't think long term this is a good idea. I don't think the long term this is a good thing for the Republicans, because when you get to that national stage, this stuff looks ridiculous. You might be able to win in states like Marjorie Taylor Greene or replace a moderate with a far right candidate, but as far as the presidency, man, I don't know, man. Like, there won't be another Trump. There's not going to be another person like Donald Trump. And if he loses again, which is highly likely, or just doesn't run again, I don't know where the Republican Party goes. I mean, they have their rhetoric behind it, but like on that national stage, that general election, I don't know, man. But obviously, what we're seeing right now is certainly historic. A massive realignment in the Republican Party, a rejection of past elites. Romney now on the chopping block, Cheney chopped off. A lot of people leaving the party, literally hundreds of Republicans leaving the party. And yeah, I mean, Liz Cheney was canceled. So I want to just read a quote from her, because she is not mincing words when she gave like about a 7-minute speech the other day. And the one quote I wanted to say was, "Those who are refusing to accept the rulings of our courts are at war with the Constitution." So even a war hawk in her rhetoric around the election, huh? Yeah. Any final thoughts? Wrap this one up before we move on to the next episode, Alex.
Yeah, just wanted to say something real quick here. Is that I think you're right. In the long term, this isn't going to work. I do assume Trump will be the nominee in 2024 unless something happens health wise. He is getting older, but I think Bill Maher called him like a sewage rat or something. He lives forever. Like, he eats crappy and just keeps going. But I think Liz Cheney is thinking about the long term, and I think she'll be around. And the other thing I'll say is, for our listeners, check out this breaking, or this kind of progressing story about Kevin McCarthy. It looks like he hired this guy named Brian Jack, who was a top advisor to Trump, and he's one of the guys who met with the protest organizers before the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. McCarthy, after the storming of the Capitol, said he wanted a commission, but he's backtracked. And then, weirdly, in March, he hired one of the guys who was an advisor and met with people for this Stop the Steal rally. And so I think there's some internal shit going on here involving Kevin McCarthy himself. And so I challenge people to check that out. Newsweek, The Bulwark, and CNN have reported on it at this point. But I think Kevin McCarthy might be facing some issues, and that's why he doesn't want this commission opened up. So, yeah.
The winds are changing, or the winds of change are blowing, or whatever the hell the conversation is. Anyway, thank you guys. This episode, if you're watching live, stay tuned. We're going to be talking about Latin America, specifically Colombia and some other countries in that area. What's going on down there and the unrest we're seeing. And yeah, the episode will be available online as well. Thanks for watching the Tonic Accord.
Peace.